thank you all very much for joining us for Design Thinking 101, the design thinking process and the role of the facilitator, which is being led for us today by the amazing Jen Marin Jericho, who I have been lucky enough to have as a friend of mine via AIGA for years now. We met at a retreat. I don't know how long ago we met at an AIGA leadership retreat, and we have honestly been talking about a way to bring an event like this to Dallas for at least a couple of years, and thought that like a 101 would be a nice toe in the water to get us started, and see where we move forward from there and what's really right for the community. Jennifer has led dozens of workshops, learning through practice and teaching others how to plan and facilitate. Her experience in design thinking is driven by her belief that effective communication and collaboration lead to beautiful solutions that solve problems for real people. She has spent 14 years as an educator, 8 years as a facilitator. She is a trained design thinking facilitator and strategic thinker. She is the co-owner of the Jericho Vinegar Works. She is, which is a design and illustration studio, by the way. We did link to that in the bio online if you want to check them out. And she is the co-founder of AIGA's Creative Lead Con, which is also super exciting, and I believe will probably be touched on gently as we work through as well. So with that, I will roll the clap track, and Jennifer, you're welcome to take over.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. First of all, just very excited to see you and to be here together. It's nice to have some video, some actual people to talk to, so I don't feel like a crazy person talking to myself this morning. I am based here in Baltimore. Today we've put together quite a good presentation, and by we I mean me. And so I'm going to walk through a little bit what we kind of how we came about this and what we're hoping to accomplish today. As Lauren mentioned, there's a chat box, drop your questions in there. We're going to do the best we can to answer everything for you. The most important thing is that, you know, your questions will help guide that conversation. And if I've left something out, it always helps as we're moving forward. I have been in Baltimore for the last 20 years. I've been involved with AIGA for quite a while. I'm originally from Caracas, Venezuela. And I'd love to shout out to one particular person who's a friend from Blast from the Past who is here today, and just so excited to see all the familiar faces. So what I'm hoping you're going to take away from DT 101 is, first of all, how to plan a successful workshop and what those components are. We will talk about facilitation, the role of facilitation, how to get, you know, hopefully you're going to walk out of this with a little bit more confidence, just a little bit more tools that you can use. For those of you that have zero facilitation experience, that is okay. I will cover a little bit. Whitney kindly asked that we cover what in the world is facilitation. So we'll kind of get through that in just a moment. And then finally, where you go for continued learning, because really, if you're interested in having this as a practice, it does require a lot of self guidance, and there's a lot of different places that you can go. So I've collected some from my colleagues, as well as you know, some of the places where I go to learn more. Just to cover again what we're not going to cover today, and making sure that expectations are clear. First of all, we will not be learning design thinking activities and how to facilitate them. There's a myriad of ways in which one can implement design thinking activities. And today we're really talking more around that workshop and the facilitation and being a great facilitator. We will not be able or have the time to get into like deep dive about how to successfully plan a workshop, which is why we're looking to collaborate with AIGA DFW on a more deep dive event later this summer. And finally, you know, practice managing various personalities during facilitation. And again, you know, facilitation is just as simple as what we're saying is being the leader in the room, facilitating conversation, and we'll talk a little bit more through that. But again, it takes quite a lot of practice to manage all the different types of people that might be coming into your event. And we won't be practicing that today, but we will be covering some pitfalls and how to navigate and pivot during a workshop. So While, as you heard earlier, I have a lot of facilitation experience, I feel like I am a natural presenter, and I can command a room well. So it was really important for me to pull not just people that I go to, colleagues that facilitate, to get a sense. So some of the information you'll find here is actually a diverse perspective from other people. I didn't want to just say, hey, here's my opinion on everything, but instead really collect from people that I admire that have been facilitating and leading workshops and asking them questions around facilitation and around leading a successful workshop. So this to me gives me so much more confidence that what I'm presenting to you today is founded on best practices, not just of Jennifer's opinions. And so again, and this is just a common practice for me, is when I'm asking for advice from someone, when I'm looking for guidance from someone, it's important for me to understand where they stand, what are their values, what is their experience, so that you can better match, what they're telling you. And that comes again, what is the environment that someone lives in, be it as a professional, in-house, freelance, community building, nonprofit, all of these things impact. So the people that I pulled, I sent it out to about 20 people, about 15 people filled out the survey. They came from higher education, nonprofit, in-house, community leaders, people who have been doing this for quite a while every day. Where I sit here is I've done in-person and virtual facilitation, and as well as my confidence kind of lies in the blue here. So I'm confident, I like the challenge, and I always need more practice. And putting together this presentation was really helpful for me, and bringing back like everything that I've experienced in like 7 years. And now we have this like very concise way of talking about it. So I think first of all, again, ground rules and shared language. So to me, design thinking is a tool. I have been trained to use design thinking as a tool. I also have certification in using other types of tools. So for example, there's a dependable strength training process. So I've been able to facilitate that as a certified career coach. So again, facilitation is a practice, and as a facilitator, your job is to build a toolkit and really modify it for your needs and your customers and clients' needs and your department team, whoever you're working with. So do keep that in mind, that sometimes a workshop is more than just design thinking activities. So why do we facilitate, and what does that mean? And so this was a great conversation I had with someone that I spoke with earlier this year. And we facilitate to educate, to advocate, to drive business decisions, to improve processes, to work collaboratively with other, craft experiences, to uncover new perspectives and validate assumptions. When I say yes and, which is a common tool of a facilitator or anyone that wants to work collaboratively, I also say that, really thinking about the why behind that facilitation. And why we don't facilitate is because someone asks us for a design thinking workshop. Big no. So the reason why, we really want to make sure that we understand the goals. And if you've heard, so Natasha Jen had a video called Design Thinking is Bullshit. We've seen articles that argue against design thinking. And I think it's because it's really not, how do I best explain this? This is really a multifaceted process. And the value of the tool is really dependent on how you execute, implement, follow up, the questions that you ask. And so I think sometimes if you just take something for design thinking's sake, it starts to water down the message, which is why you won't find me often talking about design thinking. Really what I'm doing is solving problems and having effective conversations for a variety of outcomes. So how do you build confidence saying no? Well, I think it's really understanding the why behind that. And so I was reading this fantastic book that nobody knows. I have so many books in my library. It's called Design Studies. Human-centered design, I found this sentence: human-centered design is fundamentally an affirmation of human dignity. Oh my goodness, that's quite a lot to unpack. And so I was like, well, what does that mean? I'll keep reading. And I loved this statement. So as an instrument of cultural life, design is the way we create all the artifacts and communications that serve human beings, striving to meet their needs and desires. And our job really is we're facilitating the exchange of information and ideas, and it's essential for civil and political life. And I love this because, again, it comes back down to the why. Like, you should be focusing on the outcomes when you're trying to build this type of collaborative, inclusive process. But there's a lot of things that you need to navigate throughout the way to really ensure that you're living up to the purpose of this type of work. And it shouldn't be, I want to stand in front of a bunch of sticky notes, even though sticky notes are great and I love them. So again, talking about shared language, and I will definitely share that book. It's called Design Studies, Theory and Research in Graphic Design. And I'll make sure I drop that in there. Good job. Excellent. So workshop versus activity. What does that mean? So an activity is generally something smaller. It can be anywhere between 50 and 90 minutes. You could do, I'm going to caveat, which I don't think you can execute it with little preparation depending on several factors we will cover shortly. A workshop is a combination of activities to solve predetermined problems. So it's generally longer. It requires a lot of preparation. It does require follow-up and reflection. Activities in a similar way, but I think really when you're ready to say, I'm going to put together a workshop, there's a whole lot of other things involved. With activities, when I say that they can be executed with little preparation, I think that's really dependent on who's in the room. Are they comfortable with facilitation? I mean, with collaboration of that nature. So if you have new people in the room who have not been part of this process, it's going to require more preparation, and we'll talk a little bit more through that. So planning a workshop, we're going to start here. So this chart, this diagram that I found, it's in my book, Brand Identity, really talks about the experience. So that blue line running across is sort of the person's experience as they're moving through an event, right? From planning all the way through check-in into the actual individual space experience, the public space experience, which is a little different in today's environment, but still exists. Then the leaving the department and that following up, and sort of the pink dots are sort of these crucial moments where you're really building that experience for someone. And I think this really explains in these rings, you go, wow, there's a lot involved in building this experience and in that before and after space, not just in the day of. And this is one of those places why collaboration, why building a team for a workshop is so important, because there's a lot of components on top of facilitating that you have to really think about. And this really helps me showcase that when we're starting to get in depth into the process, what are we thinking about? What are all these minute, processes and things that you need to plan for each stage of this experience? So the elements of a successful workshop, I'm breaking it down into 3 categories. Each category we could go into depth. I mentioned earlier, why are we not going into in-depth? When I did as a trained facilitator through the IBM process, that was a 3 to 5 day process to really learn full day workshops. It takes a lot of work to get into the nitty gritty of how you push this. So we're going to try to accomplish this in the 90 minutes that we have together today. So when we're preparing, I think first of all, it's just the basics. Stay organized. It doesn't matter what you're doing in this world, you should likely try to be organized about it. And especially when you're building a workshop, you might not be doing it all at once. So creating shared folders, making sure you document your conversations however you feel comfortable. I've had people that, use the recorder on their phone, people that use Google Drive. It doesn't really, I won't get specific into like use this specific tool, just saying that understanding that you need a place where you might be able to share and collaborate. So for example, when I bring facilitators on board to help me plan, I want a place that everyone can go to drop in research, new articles, maybe potential activities, notes on conversations that have been transcribed. So we're making sure we're really documenting all that organization. Research is so important when you're starting to plan a workshop. people are coming to you because they know that you can, facilitate and solve a problem. But it requires a lot of people to figure out what that problem is. And this is probably some of the most painful processes for me. I think I usually tend to say, you just trust the process that it will begin to take shape. But the only way it's going to do that is through that research. So conduct interviews, do surveys, meet with stakeholders, understand who is going to be in the room. And if the people that are helping you put together a workshop don't know that, then find a way during registration that you're taking some sort of poll. We did it very briefly at the beginning of today. It's more, I can better craft conversations and facilitate a workshop if I understand who's present. And it's really hard to do if you don't know that. And sometimes you have to rapidly figure that out. So there's, different ways in which you can do this. Visiting the location in which you want to host is important. If it's a virtual facilitation, it would be important to really test out and the capabilities. And we'll talk a little bit more about what you might want to look for in that space. So this was an example of, I didn't know. So last summer, I ran a 6-city workshop. It was 6 workshops back to back across 7 weeks across US and Canada. And while I knew the people that were going to be present in terms of my partners, I had zero idea who were the people registered. And so I wanted through registration to figure out a quick way of saying, well, what in the world are they here for, so that I can craft that conversation, especially since I generally am not the smartest person in the room when I'm facilitating. I'm generally working with really smart people. And one of my biggest fear factors in facilitating is do I know enough about this specific topic? And it turns out you don't have to know enough. You just need to know how to pull that information out from the really smart people. So again, this was a bit of that work. And then I always put in lunch because people show up for free food all the time. So what else do you want to do when you're planning a workshop or even an activity? Again, when you face a problem, when someone says, hey, we need to create a workshop to solve X problem. So for us specifically, it might be branding, right? So, hey, we need to really talk about sort of how we're positioning ourselves as a company. We need to understand what our customers think about us. We want to bring people together. Or for us, it's, hey, there's a major change in our industry and we need to figure out how this is impacting people and how we can better serve them as our customers. So sometimes putting on a workshop requires workshops. And that's really something that I learned throughout the way. So when we were doing that 6-week facilitation, I spent 3 months where I was pulling different people in to develop an agenda, to frame the problem, to test activities, to keep saying, what is it that we're doing again? Why are we doing it? And even every time I asked, we got a little closer. And sometimes we readjusted and said, oh no, we don't want to go down that road. Getting buy-in is also really important. So we're going to get a little bit later down the road talking about facilitation, but when you bring your key stakeholders into the process of planning a workshop, they're going to be your advocates in all areas before, during, and after this workshop. And so being able to vulnerably workshop and session and test out things with the people that you're building this for is so important. It does not start the day of the event. It starts way before the event. Buy-in starts almost immediately. And there's ways in which you can do that to really, make sure people feel confident that they're showing up for a reason. And that's so important. I think sometimes everyone expects the surprise factor. Oh, don't tell them anything, let them just come. But I think people like to know, and I think we know it right now from our current state of the world, is that we kind of like to know where we stand. And especially when you're asking people to bring their expertise and their knowledge and be open, give them expectations, bring them along. So questioning assumptions. I could spend like 90 minutes just talking about this. So I won't. So here are your 4 questions. Under questioning assumptions, you should be asking yourself who is not in the room. And I think this is part of that, your responsibility as a facilitator. you are not, as a facilitator, always in control about who's going to participate, about who's going to be involved in the process. But that does not mean that you do not have a responsibility to ask the question, who is not in the room, who are we not including, whose perspective is missing. And sometimes you can find other ways in which you can get that information, right? So you could say, okay, they can't show up to the workshop, but we can do a survey, or we can do one-on-one interviews. So again, we can collect from those people that aren't present. And if that's not possible, if you're not getting approved for that, if there's not enough time, then part of your responsibility is to document and say, hey, we collected all this, we did this, we framed this problem, but you know what? These people were missing, and my recommendations are that you figure out a way to gather this input. For us, it came up in that 6-city workshop where our end users weren't really present in the room. And so we saw in the research the gaps, and that was good too. So it's not a bad thing, but do ask the hard questions. So once you've kind of started, so you've done some research, you've begun some planning, you're doing homework, you're gathering all this information, you're really stressed out, you don't know if you're going to get it done in time. And now you develop a project scope. It does not matter if you are an in-house creative, if you are sort of a studio that has a client base, if you're doing this, for your nonprofit, if you're volunteering, you must have a set of expectations. It should be a document that has goals, the expectations, that you understand what the stakeholders' desired outcomes are. And there might be some negotiation where you go, I don't think we're going to be able to accomplish everything you want in the allocated time. A list of materials and who is responsible for purchasing those materials. A budget, so if you're feeding people, if you have to pay for Zoom, these things need to be incorporated in there so you understand that cost. If you're bringing on co-facilitators, it would be really nice if you paid them. And then again, include a loose schedule of how, from planning, and always put in a backup plan. So Joe, who's going to be joining us a little later today, we facilitated a workshop for a client in February, and snow happens in February. So we put right there in the contract, what are the, potential disruptions? Snow. And what are we going to do about it? And so then we can come up to our client, customer, stakeholder, whoever that is, get sign off and ensure that we all understand what this workshop. So this is a very important process. If you skip this process, you can end up, and you might have to go back to visit it. So make sure that once it's signed off, you're sharing it with the appropriate people so they understand. You go, no, that we weren't going to cover that. We're welcome to cover that later. Obviously, you're not just, it's not a hard no, but it's just setting expectations so someone doesn't come back and say, I thought you were going to give me X, Y, Z. And you go, is it in the project scope? So what can looking and collecting all this information look like? This is a worksheet that was given to us through the IBM Facilitation Summit. It has quite a lot of information with very small fields to fill out. But again, this is something of, find what works for you. I don't currently use this today, but it was really amazing to see, how much is involved really in putting together a really successful workshop. How many things you might not think of. I'm the first, I love to cook. I cook all the time. It's great. I don't want to talk about feeding people at an event. I don't care, and it doesn't matter. You have to feed them if it's an in-person event, or give them snacks and stuff like that. But this kind of helps you really make sure that you've got everything in one place. Another great resource that if you haven't heard of the Path to Impact or AIJ Design for Good, do look them up. Many chapters have this resource available. It's a beautiful, beautiful workbook. I have one myself. Joe has one over there. That really just, again, how do you create impact? And how do you plan? Just so many great, and it's a workbook, so you can really ask hard questions. You're supposed to pick it apart. It's not supposed to be, point A to Z. Just use it. So stay tuned. AIJ Dallas Fort Worth is going to be doing a workshop around Path to Impact in the fall. And if you have any questions for any of your local chapters, please go ahead and reach out to your chapter leaders. So, goodness, you have all your details. You've done your research, feeling good, things are starting to take shape, but you haven't started building the actual workshop, by the way. We've been doing all the homework. Now you have to assemble a team. You'll often hear facilitators say, do not facilitate alone. Now, we don't always have the privilege of having co-facilitators internally. As an in-house individual contributor in lots of places, you might just not have that ability, but it does not mean that you do not bring facilitators along. I brought in the vice president of marketing, who is my boss, and together I taught her some basic groundwork on facilitation, on design thinking, so that she could assist me through this workshop and we could work together through it. So knowing sometimes that your co-facilitator might be someone that has less experience than you, and that's okay, because it's about having a sounding board. Making sure that you're delegating event logistics. I put in person, but that's also something to do in virtual. Again, if your job is to build a workshop to solve a problem, you need someone to be supporting other elements. If you're trying to do everything yourself, you can run ragged, and then you might be entirely too concerned about picking a venue, finding food, answering questions of participants, following up after an event, buying supplies, getting the supplies to the venue. And as facilitator, your job is going to be to manage that room, to deliver outcomes. So finding ways to bring people along in your workshop and get help is important. It also helps because likely the people that are helping you build this team of yours, even if they're not necessarily facilitator teams, they will get buy-in because they're seeing the amount of work that's involved, which is why it's just so important that you don't think that you're supposed to be like the only person putting this together. I think the only thing here that I also, documenting meetings, crucial. Documenting the event. You're going to see me repeat this a few times. Finding an external source. This for me has been really crucial. Even if I'm working internally, I'd like to have someone that has zero concept of the problem I'm solving and talk through things with them. Sometimes it's, my AIGA colleagues that, have gone through this FACT Summit with me that understand facilitation. Last summer, I went and reached out to a local agency here in Baltimore called ThinkStack, and the founder has incredible facilitation experience for a very tech-focused audience. And so I went down and I sat with him and just listened to him. And I feel like without that meeting, maybe I wouldn't have been able to execute as well. And so I think that part of external resources is it's really about building your toolkit, listening to how other people facilitate, run workshops, use activities. You start to build the toolkit of all these resources that you can use. So it is a very collaborative thing, and I've definitely depended a lot on mentoring and mentors. And remember also that it's not so much like, be conscious that you can ask someone to mentor you for an hour or 16 weeks. So really keep that in mind as moving forward. Is sometimes you feel like the ask is really hard. Be like, oh my goodness, I know you facilitate. Can you give me an hour to talk through this? You can feel comfortable if you don't already have a network of people that are doing this work. Taking a deep breath. Okay, so I added this on this morning because I was thinking a little bit about choosing your space. Whether virtual or in person, space is so important, and it's so conducive to really good workshops. If you're putting someone in a basement room with terrible lighting and not enough space to move around, people are not going to be ready to be open and want to share and participate. So space is actually crucial to this. And even in virtual, you have to keep that in mind. And I have a little bit of that a little bit next. But again, how many people can it hold? If it's an open event, how much overflow is there? Lighting is important. If wall space, tables, what's available to you? Do you need AV equipment? Do they have AV equipment? Is there a space for attendees to step away? this is really important. So people are going to still need to take phone calls. They're still going to need to take a break. Where can they go? I'd hope that they're just not standing outside the bathroom or hiding in a stall, but instead you've created a space where people can just take a break and go somewhere to regroup. So thinking about that, and sometimes we don't have control over this, but making sure you get eyes on the space is really important. For virtual collaboration, ask yourself the questions. Don't assume that everyone's using video. Still ask how many people can, conferencing at our internal teams works very differently than Zoom, which works very different than Google Meet. So you have to still kind of pick. We love Zoom because you can break teams into groups, which is important, especially with virtual facilitation, understanding that it's a bit harder sometimes to facilitate very large groups, especially if you're starting out. And then tools. So again, yes, as you've noted, I barely talked about sticky notes so far. Yes, there should be more than just a sticky note tool, right? Is there a chat function? Can people sketch and draw? Can they still speak? Maybe people aren't so great about typing out, but maybe they might answer if they're able to talk. So these are questions you need to ask yourself. Tools for facilitation. Promised you, look. Okay, yes. I was like, where are the sticky notes? They're not here. So location, important. Agenda, very important. You will need more than one agenda. We'll be covering that. A slide deck, maybe. I think that when we talk about deck and we get into facilitation, a deck can be really helpful for your attendees to be reminded what the prompt is, code of contact, remember we were looking at that chart and it's like individual experience and group experience. And so you want to think about, okay, so I'm in a room, not everyone, because the only thing, let me see, how do I want to frame this? When you're in a room, be it physical or virtual, there's a lot of distractions that can come about. So you need visual guides to push people along, keep people aligned. Don't just rely on yourself to be like, okay, pay attention. Pre-work, a timer, very important, materials, and obviously activities. Some other tools that you can use for in-person facilitation. I love this. Some of these come from my, that survey I sent out, and someone had on there painter's tape. I was like, oh, how are you using painter's tape? So this is why I love co-facilitating or assisting someone in facilitation, is I get to see how they use the tools and I learn from them and I go, oh, I didn't think about that. Thinking again, as well as like you are creating waste when you're developing workshops that are in person. So thinking also about what happens to these materials after the fact is important. Generally, Joe and I will tell you that most of them end up in the trunk of our cars for months and months. But no, this is the part where, making sure that you kind of watch how other people use tools. A camera, again, phone camera, the actual, just making sure that you can take pictures and document. In terms of video, I find the majority of people are very uncomfortable being videotaped. So if you're looking to draw information from people, I don't think you should videotape them. I think you need to find ways to create a safe, comfortable space for people. So do note that. Also important, when you use the camera, you need to tell people why. So I remember, if you have your volunteer or, someone that you've assigned to take pictures, let people know why you're taking pictures. You're documenting the day. You're taking pictures of the activities. You're not necessarily, just social mediaing. It's important that they understand that and how you're going to use the images. If you're going to take pictures of people facilitating, it might be important to ask for permission or let them know that it'll be public. For virtual facilitation, this is not rocket science. tools, Google Sheets. I do challenge you, just because you're facilitating virtually doesn't mean that everything needs to be virtual. I have stood in front of a camera with a whiteboard and facilitated and just listened to people talk. So do challenge yourself to question sometimes, you know, are you becoming too dependent on technology? So I said we needed to build an agenda. This is an example of the type of agenda and how you might put this together in a workshop. So this looks beautiful because it is likely years of work from very smart people who have workshopped this. So essentially it's, you know, the step of the day that includes everything. I love it. It says wait for late people. Right, so you're anticipating disruption from the beginning. You're not waiting around for that. How much time you're going to wait, and what's the time you're going to put on the stopwatch, which I think is really interesting. I haven't seen this type of column before, so that's really great. If I were to share with you one of my preliminary agendas, it might not be this nice because it hasn't been workshopped yet, and it might be. So even when you build an agenda, I would recommend you then go back after the workshop or activity is over and adjust that agenda for what you learned along the way. Because then that means that next time you go back, you're like, oh, right, I forgot this, or I didn't put in transition times. Are there breaks? In the notes, usually if I'm collaborating with someone else, I'm building a workshop, in the notes, I might put in like, I don't think this is going to work well, or is this the right place for this? You know, so ask yourself all those questions. You will need no, Siri. Goodness, Siri has been listening to me that whole time. Note that an agenda that you share with your participants and your stakeholders might look different. So I would not give this level of detail to everyone. This is really for people that are facilitating with you or working the workshop. Know that you can give someone too much information. Also know that part of facilitation is leaving people sometimes in the dark and having them experience with you. So it's okay, you do not have to, this is not always public facing. Pre-work, this is kind of a big topic that I'm going to touch on. Again, how you develop pre-work really depends on the problem that you're solving. And one of my challenges when we talk about design thinking is we're not talking about a specific problem, so it's very hard for me to say this is exactly what you need for this. But pre-work is really important because it does get people prepared. Remember, you've likely now spent weeks putting together this workshop, so you're, you know, immersed in it. People walking into your workshop might not be. How do you get them there quickly? How are you helping them transition in that first stage after check-in and then come along? So some things that might count as pre-work are surveys that you can run during registration or before, or like you saw earlier, the voting dot activity. Reflecting on a problem statement. So you might ask them and send them a worksheet and ask them to reflect on something. Share research that you've done, articles, videos, maybe do a personality assessment. So this is kind of interesting. If you don't know who's in the room or you don't really understand the types of personalities in the room, you know, maybe you share a personality assessment and you figure out the DISC is a really good one. That is very fast. And again, this is how you might kind of gauge. Sometimes you'll want to sort of assign groups. And so this can also help you put people together so you don't have like a group of like all dominating people and then a bunch of shy people together. You know, those are some of the ways in which you might want to manage groups when you're using your pre-work. And then finally, testing your prototype. So I think this is where you find your pain points. Workshops can be very stressful. You spend a lot of work on them. Did you go ahead and plan, you know, everything right? As you're describing it to someone, you will figure out like, oh my goodness, I need to clarify this, or I didn't explain this very well, or ooh, I think, you know, someone might say, what if they go in this direction? So keep that in mind. to the question of an example of a self-guided activity. I mean, I think that that might be, let me see, I have a couple. So we did one for a branding workshop where I needed to get a sense for the types of services, tangible, intangible types of relationships that people were building with customers. So I had a series of prompts. A personal empathy map could be really interesting. Again, it just depends on how much experience someone has with an actual activity. But I have run personal empathy maps where I just want people to sort of frame where they are in terms of a particular topic. So again, an empathy map, for those of you that don't know, is essentially you're doing a thinking, feeling, doing, and saying in terms of a particular topic. So here we go. I have completed, that's pretty good, not too bad. So we've talked a little bit about a workshop. We've discussed some of the elements, some of the planning, some of the materials that you'll want to cover, some of the surprises along the way, and how to navigate that. I do want you to be aware that it is, for me specifically, has been very painful to sometimes plan workshops. It's hard. And you don't always think that you're going to get it right. And you do have to constantly tell yourself, you see at the bottom of this picture, trust the process. Yes, I often have to remind myself, right? So trust the process, you will get there. This room here is one of those examples of I didn't ask enough questions about a room before I decided to facilitate. So Joe and I walked in, he's actually in this picture, and it was a small apartment, and the entire apartment was covered in plants, and there was no wall space. And we had probably about double the amount of people planned, and we had to immediately adjust. There was no AV, so had to have a lot of ground rules and stuff on giant sticky notes. And moving people around was hard because, again, very tight room. We had like 12 people in this room. And so we kept having to move that big red round table around. And the person who, his name is Hilton Carter, and he has a book on designing spaces, really lovely, great Instagram with lots of plants in them. He moved plants around to help us get a little bit of wall space, but it was something that I remember I kicked myself with Joe. I was like, we didn't ask enough questions about the space. Facilitation. So I think there's some soft and hard skills that make a great facilitator. And I love the list that we compiled here, my fellow survey participants, as well as some brainstorming around what it really takes to be a great facilitator. Collaboration is a given. Being flexible is important. Open and proactive when, and again, I think that proactive comes back to, do you really know why you're doing what you're doing? Being a good synthesizer is one that's is just so important, is can you really repeat back and synthesize what is being said in a really easy way? That takes practice. I don't expect anyone to have all of these traits on day one. It's just not possible. I took these traits and I actually started to sticky note them and figure out, okay, well, what things might, be traits for commanding a room or being credible and prepared. For me, being credible and prepared and knowledgeable, all are hard skills. You have to really do your work and study and practice and understand activities, and there's some things that are intuitive and then others that are just not. For me, flexibility meant a little bit that ability to improvise and pivot, to be adaptable, as well as anticipating disruption. Commanding a room, we're going to be talking about that most today, because I think that it's really the success or failure of the implementation of a workshop. And again, so when we talk about, and it was asked earlier today, so like, what does facilitation look like, in a concrete way? I have facilitated a small team internal team, my team in the marketing department on, how do we build better case studies, because our case studies weren't being published in the time that we wanted, and they were failing constantly, and we needed to figure out what the problem was and how did we improve the process. And, to other facilitation, it was more around value proposition or discovering pain points. So again, this is one of the reasons why I say this is a lot more than we could cover in 90 minutes. But really being able to command that room, to listen and assess, to read nonverbal cues is very, very important. Being approachable, being able to ask questions. I always say, like, are you a fire starter or do you put out fires? This is one of those places where you really need to know that. So if you're reactive to conflict, you need to find ways to work around that. Read about conflict management, figure out about group dynamics. There are ways to sort of change your mindset around these problems. But a lot of times in live facilitation with groups that are difficult, I facilitated groups as large as like 30 to 50 people, and it gets very hard because there's a lot of stress and there's a lot of things moving around. And so how do you really make sure that you're keeping everything under control, positive, engaging, and that does take preparation and also relying on other people and co-facilitators. So facilitation as the main facilitator. So I have been lead facilitator, I have been co-facilitator, I've been simply supporter of facilitation, and I have been a participant of a facilitation. The number one thing, remember when we were talking earlier about delegating? So your job as lead facilitator is to watch that room all the time. You can't do that if you're caught in minute sort of problem solvings along the way. And this is why you need a team. And however you assemble that team, there's a variety of ways. So your job, when you have co-facilitators managing smaller groups, your job is to observe the entire room, to pay attention to, the energy in the room, the verbal cues, are people starting to get frustrated? And this requires you to be really observant. So often when I'm setting up a workshop, when we did that 6-city workshop, my co-facilitator and supporter of event, her job was to greet people because I'm trying to get into observant mode and try to dive into facilitation. And so I don't want to be pulled away with questions like, where's the bathroom? And that's okay. And these are my preferences in terms of facilitation because I know what will break my focus, so I am proactive about it. Voice is probably the thing, again, that you can learn. I have about 15 years of teaching experience. I've worked as an adjunct for a long time. I've done a slew of presentations. I have 2 very charming Venezuelan parents. And so I think that throughout the years have developed a confident voice. Well-paced, I work on it. Being well-paced in a workshop, not going too fast, understanding when people need more information, not going too slow, not over-talking. Over-talking is really important, especially if you're nervous. You might start over-explaining, over-talking, and really what you want is to deliver information in bite-sized content. And so, again, confident voice, even if you don't feel confident, that good practice of really presenting, it will get better, but voice is important. If you want a resource for how to really speak with impact, I attended a session at the Women Spanning the Globe event that is hosted here by the World Trade Center Institute in Baltimore. And Allison Shapira spoke, and she was amazing and gave some great tips for speaking with impact. If you don't want to buy the book, you can follow her on LinkedIn. She posts a lot of good advice, and she's got a great website and blog. I have not read this book, so I'm not vouching for the book, but as a person, Allison she has some great content and good storytelling. So you have the voice, you've planned the workshop, you're ready to dive in. and you just go straight into activities. No. You really need to frame the workshop. So remember, you've done, goodness, all the work to frame the workshop in your head. How are you now going to share the foundation so that everyone has a shared understanding of why you are there? It's very important, and I think this is one of those places where design thinking starts to get criticized, is because things can go wrong if you don't have the right people in the room, or if everyone's coming based on opinion and they're not basing things on data, right? So we want to say, hey, we've learned that there's this pain point in the process. So to the point earlier, our case studies aren't being published. We spent 6 months on them and they're failing. And but it's not just, okay, now let's think about it. We need to go out and collect data that we can share out and say, these are the things that we learned. Now let's solve the problem. So, so important. So I love this. This is part of, and this goes way beyond facilitation. This is called advocating in my mind. I show up when I'm presenting, when I'm leading discussions or difficult conversations. I have to bring in research. It should not just all come from me. And this helps really present and back up the why you are present, why you are there. Leverage it. There's so much information out there, and really start to figure out a way that you can keep it, in, so that you can pull from it. So, I have like books everywhere because that's what I do, but you can have digital documents. Again, how do you really share and frame that? Especially for stakeholders, when I'm working with C-suite, they're very fact-oriented, very data-oriented. And so I need to come with data and facts to present it. I can't just expect that everyone wants to make awesome things out of empathy. And that's not really, that might be where I'm driven, but really bring those facts. So virtual facilitation, someone asked me on LinkedIn if I was going to share about this. Yes, so important. I think a lot of us are, even running a meeting is facilitating virtually right now, right? So we're seeing a lot of bumps in the road. For me, have a backup tech plan. It could be as simple as someone else, making sure they're your co-participant in case you drop off. Do not abandon your process. I am a huge, as I've been learning, every time something goes wrong, I was like, oh, right, because I skipped a step. And so understanding the process is so important. Again, break into groups. So it really depends. I've heard people facilitate like 120 people virtually. That can happen in a variety of ways. But I know that when we have smaller groups online, there's more collaboration in my teams. I was telling someone the other day, I am most fascinated when a virtual facilitation goes bad because I need to figure out what happened. And the other day I had a virtual facilitation with 22 people, and I skipped some steps, and I didn't prep them properly, and I didn't break them up into groups. So I only had about 20% engagement, and that stresses me out because that's, I'm doing bad math right now. But that's like a very small group of people that are participating and a very large group of people that are silent. And so, monitor the chat windows, give people other ways in which to contribute. So they might not want to dive into facilitation, but maybe they want to chat out their comments, and then someone else, puts it out there for everyone to see. Give people a way. Again, the reason why Sharpie and sticky note works is because it eventually is just everyone's voice equally. And that's hard to do if you feel like you might be called out. If you've got the president of the company is facilitating with one of the salespeople, maybe that salesperson doesn't want the president to know what they think. So how are you facilitating the people with no voice? How do you give them voice? And that, that takes work to really figure out. What else do I have to say about this? Knowing your participants, calling them by name works, really, because you start paying attention because now you know that someone's going to call you. So old rules like that, teaching rules, calling people by name, and also staying silent really long until everyone's super uncomfortable, that works really well. You should try it. You will get better at it. In terms of not abandoning the process, again, this is a reminder, you've seen this a couple of times already. Establish rules, build rapport. I tend to be really laser focused when I'm going into a workshop, which is why I like co-facilitating, because maybe someone else wants to sort of network and ask questions and talk to people. Meanwhile, I'm like, is everything in order? I can't think straight. I don't remember my name anymore. So those are the parts where I think sometimes that collaboration really helps. Incorporate other people's thoughts and ideas. Say, hey, Doug mentioned XYZ over here, and this is really great. Not just calling people out to give you an answer on the spot, but include them in the conversation, and you'll get that they'll start to feel a little bit more like it's collaborative. It's really, really easy to hide in virtual meetings. And I don't feel comfortable forcing people to put their video on. So I have to find other ways to get them to contribute. Oh, and that's the other part before we move to that is figure out if something's not working, try something else. So maybe it's not just like one facilitation with 30 people, but it's like 3 facilitations with 5 people in each facilitation. So that's the part about being flexible is does it have to be the way that you're doing it if it's not working? What else could you do instead? So don't give up. And I think as long as you're vulnerable and you're sharing with people like, hey, we're working this out. It's like, oh my goodness, this isn't working. That's okay. Like, I think most people are pretty forgiving when things are not going well. It can be different, which is again, why you need to know who's in the room. There might be people who immediately disengage because you've lost their trust. Again, and that's a tough space to be. So let's get there. So we've talked a little bit about facilitation, and there are definitely what we're going to call pitfalls. So I like to call this section the pivot. So a lot of questions when Lauren and I started talking about putting together this workshop, it's, well, how do you pivot? How do you change? What happens when something goes wrong, right? And you're like, I don't know. I mean, I guess you just walk out of the room. I have done that. No, I'm just kidding. So you really do need to kind of, think through what happens if something goes wrong. I am a firm believer that if you're not wondering and anticipating disruption, you're going to be disappointed a lot. And I think that's why you need to kind of think through. And the better you get at that, the much better it's going to get to facilitate. So in workshop development, you need to make sure you understand the problem. And if you don't, continue to meet and challenge it. I love, the people that I've collaborated with, I can sit there and say, I am not feeling confident today that we have the right workshop together. We've done it before. When I've worked with Joe, like I bring something together and I'm like, I don't know. What do you think? And he's like, I'm not sure. And we're talking through it until we both feel comfortable. Don't try to do too much. I think we do it all the time. We try to do entirely too much. Remember that while your goals are to have outcomes, your goal really is to be inclusive and have people participating in the room. That's your goal, is to listen to people in the room. And so, make sure that you don't get too laser focused of like, I need to accomplish this goal and forget the people in the room who might have a different direction that they want to take you in. Sometimes if they take you in a different direction, you'll be much more pleased with the outcome, and that's okay. Time box activities. I am a terrible, terrible person at this. I have gotten much, much better. I tend to be a very fluid, organic presenter. So I tend to lock up if I have timed sessions, which is why it's good to collaborate with someone else. If someone else is your timekeeper, that helps you not start to worry too much about those things. Breaks and transitions are crucial. If you're not setting time for them, you will have problems. And setting ground rules. I have run 2 workshops that I can remember where I forgot to set ground rules, and we had some really challenging group dynamics. So this is really, really important. Code of conduct is important. We respect each other. One person speaks at the same time. Yes, and all of these things, these rules of, hey, we're common, decent people, and this is how common, decent people work together. You don't answer the phone while you're, in the middle of the room. You go somewhere. So that ground rule also is give people the space that, do you have to go to the bathroom? You don't have to ask for permission. Do you need to take a phone call, really important person or person that has like challenging life situation at home? Here's a place where you can go do that. Anticipating those spaces means less disruption. What happened? There we go. Okay, group dynamics. So it really depends here. I have led with a whole variety of different groups, and it changes every time, which is why this is hard to do without knowing who's going to be in the room, but you don't always have that privilege. So do focus on individuals and pay attention. I ran a workshop. It was a workshop for a nonprofit, and I had someone that came in who really wasn't on board. And then unfortunately, because of her resistance to the process, she actually got physically boxed out by her group, and everyone was giving her their back. And immediately, right? So like if I would have been busy not watching the room, I would have missed that. And so now I have this person that is suddenly starting to wind up because she is physically being cut out of a group. And so what do you do in that moment? Immediately be proactive, get out there, go talk to that person, and so a couple things you might do. Physically bump yourself into the circle and open it up for other people, right? So that's a way that you can have a nonverbal communication when you go, hey, y'all, stop being rude. You have to find other ways to talk to people. If that doesn't work, grab that person and move them to another group and then introduce them and stand with them. You do have to facilitate with people. So you're going to have to show them the way. I might rely. So I have run into situations where I'm like, oh my goodness, I don't know how to work with this specific person. I'm not getting through. This is why co-facilitators are great. Because I'm like, Joe, go help me here. This person, I don't know how to get them to get off their phone or participate. Rely that every personality is going to have a different match. So it's okay to go, hey, Stacy, can you go work with this group here and get them to move along? I'm noticing that they're stuck. So also feel free to move your facilitators around and make sure if you know someone's really good at getting people unstuck, go ahead and place them in a different group. Variety is so important. People do get bored. You have to catch when their energy is starting to wane and then change it. Make them stand, take a break, make them sit. I noticed at one point in time that everyone kept grabbing chairs and sitting down again. I was like, okay, well, it means that we need a moment. They want a moment to sit down. Do give them a moment to take a mental break. A lot of group collaboration is exhausting for some people, so that's important. And then I'd say watch for clicks. I don't even think if that's how you spell that right, but especially if you're working with teams that already work together, split them up. That's the part of knowing your participants. So I might say, hey, y'all already collaborate all the time and you work together. I really need you to go over here because people are different. Oh, thank you. Thank you for showing me how to spell clicks. I knew it was wrong. And so we want to really just pay attention to how you mix the dynamics of a group, and it's not always clear at first. So sometimes it has to happen immediately where you go, oh no, you go over here. Some people might listen, and if they don't listen, that's okay too. I will always remember when I first started teaching ages ago, I noticed the people that weren't in the room, the students that just didn't show up. It was like an entry-level college course, and it was the one that it was a beautiful Thursday, and everyone didn't come to class. Focus on the people that are there and want to be there, and don't let someone take that energy away from you or from the group. And we'll talk a little bit more about resistance shortly. We're getting close to the end here, so I know all of you are doing a great job listening. So tangents and disruptions. So I say use the parking lot. This is not the actual parking lot. Do not send them outside to the parking lot. What we want, the parking lot is an activity, and it literally is a piece of paper that says parking lot at the top of it. It could be a whiteboard, but really just if you find people kind of going off into a different conversation, encourage them to write down their thought and then revisit it. In addition, I usually keep, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but a feedback grid all the time, so that if you have a thought or feedback or question, you immediately put it up there. Sometimes I say noisemaker. This is going to be, again, you will have your own processes, right? So I sometimes find my voice drones out. So I've seen people that use bells. I've seen people where they go all hands up. And so you're standing in a group and everyone starts to put their hands up so that suddenly like it gets quiet. Don't physically touch people when you need them to be quiet. Find other ways. I have seen it where they're like, you will listen. And you're like, no, please don't do that. Code phrases, sometimes something funny will also bring people back. So we use like the red aardvark reads or something. They made it really hard because they made it like, so I had to stumble through it every time I was yelling around. And again, just, again, the whole encourage people to regroup. What is that? Enough, let's move on. Elmo, oh, that's good. So tech disruption. So I will always remember, it's that same class, it was Art 100, and I taught at Towson University, and the PowerPoint didn't work, and I was so new at teaching, and I'm like, well, I guess it's it. I don't know what else to do. I guess I have to cancel the class. So anticipate and have a backup plan, but don't be stressed out if you have to reschedule. It's going to be better to reschedule virtual. I think in person is really hard. Just take a break. Tell everyone, I need 15 minutes. Go do something else while we figure this out. So again, that's part of the vulnerability of, hey, we're in this together. I'm a facilitator. I'm not perfect. And I tend to want to say that to people so that they remember, I am not perfect. You are not perfect. We're working on this together. There are things that will go wrong. And that's where I feel like you start to really gain trust, when you're not trying to somehow be this just perfect human being who never screws up. Keeping the room engaged. Music is great. So I will tell you right now, we played music and I wasn't too thrilled with the music situation. It was hard. We did a couple, Joe and I did music in that garden room place. And then I think we did another music never. So be careful what type of music you pick, how loud it is, when you cut it off. Music is nice for longer sessions because it keeps people kind of up and moving. But it does also mean that you have to incorporate a new transition point where you're like, oh, okay, turn off music, move music around, but good. Snacks. I always let people know that they don't have to wait for me to take a break. So you want to go grab a snack and come back, do so. Moving is important. Switching groups, especially in long day workshops, switching groups can be really helpful. Check in with teams to see how they're doing. Do not just let people stand there forever on their own. Like, your facilitators and you should be moving around the room, asking questions. Also, FYI, if you remind them that at the end of the activity, they're going to have to share back something, that's how you keep them accountable. And then they really stress out and want to listen more because they're going to have to stand in front of the group. So keep that in mind. I will say that I have ended workshops early when I can no longer re-engage the group. So be comfortable with that. Be comfortable when you've gotten enough out of them and say, you know what, let's go ahead and end half an hour early. Everyone did a great job. So be mindful that you can do that. Disengaged participants. This is hard. I've had this before. This is again about conflict resolution, how to be polite, ask people to help, so like, what are you not seeing? Is there something that you want to add to this? Can you help me over here? It seems so. I find that sometimes it's the people that have most experience with either facilitation and design thinking or with the topic of hand that get bored really fast because they already know everything. And so what do you do with someone that already knows everything? You put them to work and you ask them to participate, or you maybe just sit with them and talk with them. But make sure, I think it's really interesting to see how contagious it can be when someone becomes disengaged and suddenly it starts to trickle from group to group. So it's important to be proactive and pull them aside. I had one time someone that started pulling my participants out to have meetings outside. That's hard. And that to me was very challenging because I'm running a workshop and now I'm noticing that there's a human being that is pulling others away for private meetings. And I kept running the workshop, and then at the break pulled that person aside and just asked respectfully if there was something going on that we needed to adjust or shift. So again, don't come, immediately reactive. Make sure you first ask, what's going on? Can I help? Why are you pulling people out of my meeting? Let's discuss before you start saying, don't pull people out of my meeting. Don't do that. So back to resistance. I think for the last few years, I definitely have. I've had moments where people have stood in the middle of a room and told me this sucks. I've had, as I've mentioned, just, again, busy people who just don't have time. So there's a few ways in which you can do this. I think, again, that code of conduct is so important, and have it up and visible and point at it. Make sure they're not going to memorize it, but point at it and say, hey, we kind of agreed together. We made a social contract that this is how we were going to behave today. Get to know people's expectations and fears. One of the people that I surveyed mentioned that they run a hopes and fears exercise at the beginning of the workshop so that they kind of understand maybe some of the resistance or reservation that people have about the topic at hand. Because I think it's always coming from a good place. It's just maybe they don't feel like they have a voice, or they think something's wrong, or they don't really understand the big picture. If you use something like a parking lot or a feedback grid, you must talk about it. Don't tell someone to put their idea in the parking lot and then not go back and talk about it. It's so important to make sure that you address people's concerns. I actually, in that 6-city workshop that I did, I took the feedback grid from one city to another. And then I would show, so I was like, so the first icebreaker activity I did to get everyone warmed up in the room, it failed miserably. I did not test it firsthand. No practice whatsoever. I just winged it, and it was horrible. And so I put on the feedback grid, I said, your icebreaker activity needs help. And then every workshop after that, when I was showing people how to use the feedback grid, I would say, oh, and here's one where I sucked and I made it better, and here it is, right? So I show them immediately that their feedback is being taken into consideration in how I build the workshop. What else did I put on here? I think that vulnerability. This is the one part. Do not engage in conflict, and do not single anyone out. Your job as facilitator is to be a listener, to be proactive, and to be inclusive. I had one of my least favorite facilitation experiences, not the whole workshop, but a moment in time, was someone that, same person, was boxed out, and it was really tough. And then she got singled out, and suddenly she felt like, and then asked to leave. And that was, it just really made the most reactionary, difficult time ever. Find ways to redirect energy, ask questions, be careful, because you do not want to get into a situation where you're making someone feel like they're getting removed from a situation. That's not what we want, not as facilitators. Okay, whew, goodness, we have gotten through so much. So what do deliverables look like? And here we're gonna, so I'm gonna walk a little bit through the deliverables, and then I'm gonna bring Joe on to have a bit of a conversation, and then we'll open it up to any of your questions that you might have. I've been kind of keeping the chat open so I can answer, because I know we've covered a lot. So deliverables need to be outlined in the workshop. In the scope. And it's important that it's very clear that people understand. And again, this component of this presentation is tough for me because I don't know what you're using a workshop for. So what in the world could I know what you're going to deliver from it? But some examples would be a survey after the workshop. You need to know how it went, what maybe you missed, maybe people that didn't want to. The pictures and recorded sessions, I wouldn't record and share with everyone, but I'd maybe share pictures. Definitely pictures of the activities that are properly labeled. So important. It is hard to document a big workshop, and we've run into that where we're like, oh my goodness. And then you must go back to it almost within 48 hours of the workshop, or you'll start to forget. So really kind of categorizing your images afterwards is really important. Summarizing your results, going ahead and debriefing with your stakeholders. So even though you're going to maybe send a post-workshop survey, you should definitely debrief with your stakeholders about how things went and what do we think are the next steps. And then in terms of designed collaterals of activities, I pulled up a couple from the toolkit that I've collected throughout the years, and I'm going to share with you. And then we can go from there. So this is an example of the VA for human-centered design. It's a journey map that was developed after quite a lot of facilitation and workshops. You can't read anything in here, and that's okay. It's more about sort of looking at, it could be as simple as here are notes, and then here is this beautiful delivered project. It's all about the scope and what you're trying to accomplish. Here's another one that I found, again, from the VA. I love, if you want to look up the VA Innovation Center, Human-Centered Design, the projects are amazing. Again, this is more around some of the shared needs collected through a workshop. This is part of a much larger presentation that was put together. So for that 6-city workshop series, my deliverable was more around a research project. So it's really guiding the organization as a whole in terms of sales enablement, content development, marketing materials, product. And so really for me, it's more of an alignment a guide that we created, that we continue to create assets almost a year after the workshops. So sometimes it's not always clear where the outcome's gonna be. So I can't stress this enough. I was told this when I started to facilitate, and it continues to be true. Practice is where you're going to find all of your pain points, and you really need to keep it up. You must continue to practice. You will discover things, and you also need to make it your own, because the reality of the matter is that I am a different person than anyone else. Kind of, we might have similar traits. So how do we, how we facilitate really is trial and error. There are things that I've seen other people facilitate that I don't feel comfortable doing. So I'm like, oh, I don't know how to do it that way. That's not how I'm going to do it. So you have to make it your own. And the only way you can do that is through practice. And then finally, collaborating with others. I don't consider myself an expert. I consider myself a continuous learner. And I'm an experienced learner. So that is why I always love facilitating with other people or helping other people put on their workshops. Because then I go, oh, is that how you did that? Oh, that's great. I didn't know how to do that. And sometimes I don't know what questions to ask. So I can call up someone and be like, how do you do that? But then really watching someone build a workshop or facilitate, you can really just get a lot of stuff that maybe they might not know how to articulate. Kind of like putting this presentation together. I mean, I didn't know that I had so much information on facilitation. So a couple places that I could send you to today. For me, again, it's continued learning. Shout out to Doug Stuckey, who, reminded me of his design thinking at Wichita. Luma Institute, fantastic resources, great blog. Mural has a great blog. I'm sure Miro has a great blog too. I just haven't been there yet. There are certificates. I do want to stress the following. Facilitation training and certification is great. It's about building a toolkit and a practice. It's not necessarily a requirement. There's lots of ways to learn, and you could definitely take a self-guided learning here and learn it on your own. You do not need to be certified to know how to do this work. But again, it just depends on how rapidly you want to learn. And I think sometimes being immersed in a program helps you answer a lot of these questions faster. Oh my gosh, we made it. Thank you. I do want to bring Joe on. And so I'm going to stop sharing my screen. This is my site. You can find me on LinkedIn. I wanted to bring Joe on to really talk about, before we get to your questions, to talk about, goodness, Joe has been, Joe Carter Brown, he was the president of AIJ Baltimore for quite a long time. He works as an in-house expert, has done design thinking and nonprofit work. We actually took on a client earlier this year and did some facilitation. And so I wanted to bring Joe on to talk a little bit about, how do you carve time for all of these things? I just presented like 60 slides on how to come up with a freaking workshop. How do you carve time and tell a client, a stakeholder in-house to say like, hey, this is what we need to do to get to what you want to accomplish?
Yeah, thanks for having me. Awesome presentation. So I like to describe it a lot. I'm a basketball fan. And so I like to describe it as stealing your shot. If anybody watches basketball, you might watch guys like Steph Curry, Manu Ginobili, Ray Allen, where they'll just run around the court and they're running through people, weaving, and then all of a sudden they get this one little opening, ball comes to them, they turn around and they shoot, and you're like, wow, I couldn't, and so that's what I feel like in a lot of instances I've had to do, steal shots, because one of the true things I think we kind of realize is a lot of our work is in such an abstract space that getting buy-in for it for someone who's uninitiated is just really hard. And I think it's because part of it is, for a lot of these people, it's their baby. It's something they worked really hard for. And for me to come in and be sometimes what I like to joke as the dream killer, the person who tells you why your idea needs to change, there's not a lot of reception to that. So I'll do that in different ways. I'll do it by just getting the chance to listen, not jumping in and assuming that I have the idea and I know the route to take. I'll take a moment to try and listen. In my current office, when I got there, a lot of people told me a lot of different things that they needed from the design team, what was going on. And so I just took some time initially to just listen. I gathered my design team and I said, what is it that you're facing? Then I went to other teams and I said, what's your problem? I didn't want to tell them what the design team's problem or what they said their problem was. I went and asked the marketing team, where's your problem coming in? And I asked the production team, where's your problem? And I just took that for a while to just listen and then try and take it and turn it back to them and say, am I hearing you correctly? And then I started looking for ways that I could start to steal those shots. If someone from the production team was saying, oh, we can never get things out on time, I might say, oh, well, do you have some time later this week for your team to come in and for us to just talk about that? And then I might have us do a journey map. Where is that issue coming in? And, so there are different ways that you have to find those shots. I think it's different from an in-house versus, with clients, if you work in an agency, because with an agency, you have, hours, billable hours, and sometimes you'll have that resistance where somebody, someone even in your company, and I've had this before when I worked at an agency, they're like, we don't have time to do that. because we don't have the hours to do it. And I'm sitting there going, well, we just spent an hour and a half in a meeting and no one still knows the answer to the question. So what's the difference, you know? But, you know, knowing how to not only find that space, but cleverly make that space so that you're not saying, I'm bringing design thinking to you. You know, I'm not discovering this space. I'm coming into this space and then learning how to work within it, and showing what I can bring into that space in clever ways. So, I think that you just have to, again, be listening. Lenny Morris, who is one of the creators of the Path to Impact process and in this book, she said something recently where she said, you know, we're the designer of consequences too. And I think that's a really important thing to remember. And to that end, I think we also have to do that first for ourselves. We have to look at what the consequences of our actions are and then how they impact things. And then we start to ask, how do we mitigate the negative consequences by asking the questions and getting to know a place, and then finding ways that we start to integrate it so that people start to go, oh, that's cool. I never did it that way before. And then instead of me saying, hey, I'm going to throw this design thinking thing at you and it's all going to be great, I can say, yeah, that's actually design thinking. There are other ways that we can do this if you really want to learn how to, if you want to find other ways, and then they're a little more receptive. And that's sort of, you have to build that buy-in by, again, sneaking those little elements into the process.
I agree, Joe. I think that's great. And I appreciate you coming on to share that feedback. We always talk about small wins. And so when I first started working, now my role is brand director for a tech company here in the United States. And I started doing activities. We used to do this annual show. It's like 300 people of size. And I started to do activities at those events, not telling anyone what it was and asking for permission only to my VP saying, hey, can I have a little space to do a little activity and see how it works. And it was that way that I started to get the large enough buy-in that then 3 years later ended up having this 6-city workshop. And I don't think it doesn't happen overnight, advocating for this type of work. And I agree with you, not using these terms, design thinking. We need to do a workshop, understanding that some people are not going to be receptive to that language. I learned in that 6-city workshop that the majority of my participants had no idea what assumptions were and really didn't like any activity where I used the word feelings. And so I had to figure out a different way and use different language because I didn't want people to shut down just because I was asking them about their feelings. So instead we had to approach it differently. And that's about really understanding people, that they have feelings, but maybe that word is way too charged.
Yeah. And I think that's also important. Like you mentioned earlier, having the data to follow, but I think it's also important, to remember that data is also an assumption, there's a great quote that I read from a statistician named George Box. And he said, all models are wrong, but some are useful. And I thought that was just a really poignant statement because that's kind of the thing, so even in advocating for, it's finding that happy medium. So yeah, not necessarily using certain trigger language that feels too ethereal and sort of abstract for some people, but also reminding them that they're also kind of working on this ethereal standpoint too. So if you have the data, reminding these C-suite executives, this is data, these aren't people. We have to make sure that this data represents the people we're talking about, and so you always have to remind them that you're also making an assumption. You're also working from an abstract space. My goal is just to make sure we're asking the right questions and we're making the right assumptions that get us to the right questions again.
Yes, and I think right before we open it up to Q&A, you remind me of something really important is it's not always really easy to tell the C-suite that they're making an assumption. And finding ways to do that is really hard. I had a workshop where I remember I was trying to do an empathy map around end users that were not in the room, and everyone was being really biased and mean. Just not, took me a second to just kind of bring everyone back and ask that question, is this really the right information? How do you ask a question to get people to think without saying, that sounds a little biased, right? In types of a workshop, like, what about this? I've also gone as far as like writing sticky notes that are maybe contradictory, or that are considering something that's not being mentioned. So I might put my thought and I walk by, I write on a sticky note, I throw it on their board, and then I walk away, getting them to think. So one of them was around, I wasn't seeing it, and it was all about accessibility in mobile technology, and I wasn't seeing anyone really asking about that. And I said, well, someone needs to ask about it. So like, there are ways as facilitators that you still have to force them, be like, no, you have to think about this. So yeah.
And I think one of the things, like, so my mantra in pretty much any situation now is ask the next question, or my question to most people is, what's the next question you can ask? So, to that end, like a lot of times when I'm facilitating, because things are time boxed, I'll try to think, I'll let people get started, and I'll see where their energy goes. And when I start to see the energy maybe like wane a little bit, I may come in and just say, think about this thing. What's the question you can ask around this? Like, I actually did a session yesterday with some people, and we were talking about redoing a website, and we're talking about how parents come in for their children. And and while we were doing our time box, I said, well, also stop thinking about them for a second, and think about, like, what is it that they see on the website? Like, think about what is it that they might encounter here, And so just kind of like getting them to ask themselves a question without saying, you need to be thinking about this. More, what question aren't you asking maybe? What question might you not be considering? So I think those are really important things to try and like keep pushing for throughout.
I agree. Thank you, Joe. I appreciate it.
No problem.
Oh, wait, where's the round of applause there? Okay, Lauren, do we have questions? I didn't answer it. I stopped watching the chat for a while.
Yeah, absolutely. No worries at all. I'm actually going to very quickly kind of give you a little bit of a break. We do have a list of questions here for you. Personally, on my side, I'm really interested in this this sort of idea of how you directly address problems without singling anybody out, right? Like this catch-22 of clearly singling people out without singling anyone out. I think that's probably got to be one of the hardest single roles of the facilitator.
Yes, absolutely. I am anti-conflict, and yet I don't know how one survives in the world without it, and we grow a lot through it. But really, I think sometimes, and it's just about nonverbal as well as verbal communication. I think everyone always focuses on verbal communication, and I don't think that's always the case, right? So if you find that two people are standing around chit-chatting and not being really great participators, go physically put your body in between them and just, go like, how's it going, right? Or hand them a pad of paper and a sticky note and say, I don't see you writing. Use comedy. Have fun with it. Some people don't assume it's malicious. I think that's where it turns out. It's like you immediately might react like it's a lack of respect. You are disrespecting me. You're talking during my session. But really, it's more like, I don't know, maybe they're really engaged and they're just like super excited and they got to talk immediately. Right? So instead of putting them down or shaming them, which can be really easy and embarrassing, and then what might happen is you might disengage them more. Instead, you can say, it depends on the room. You can be like, oh, Chatty Cathy's, how's it going? Or, oh, why don't you share with the rest of the room? Isn't that the biggest teacher one? I mean, we've been hearing that since forever. Hey, Jennifer, why don't you tell the whole class what you're thinking? See, that's why I don't talk in classes, because that's not how I want to do.
Right. All right. One of the first questions that popped up today was whether or not you could share an example of self-guided activity.
Yeah, so I saw that question, and I think that that can be just as simple as a personality assessment, an empathy map, a PDF with some prompts, and maybe some further reading. So again, it's more about homework gets people to prepare for what's ahead. And trust me, we have had it. Joe and I, we sent pre-work. We had two different teams. We had sort of like the agency's team and then the customers. And it's very clear, our stakeholders said, absolutely not. You cannot send pre-work to my clients because, I'm already asking them to show up. And you have to be okay with that, So it just really depends. And so you have to work other ways around it. But at least in what we do is say, hey, please communicate to this audience that these are the expectations moving forward. The people that show up, it's because they want to be there, even though sometimes you start to feel like they don't want to. It's not really true. You need to fight against that kind of negative thinking when you're put on the spot.
We also had a question, is there a code of conduct document with a follow-up just a few minutes later of somebody asking, do you have examples of code of conduct for social contract rules?
Yes, so I think the one that I showed, and I pulled it back up, is an example. So there's a variety of codes of conduct. This is a bit of a ground rules where I can say, listen, okay, so here are some basics, like don't hoard the Post-its. Apparently that was a problem once, so I added it to the ground rules. One idea per Post-it, encouraging wild ideas. So we walk through these, we don't just put them up. So I'll say things like, don't shut other people down, especially when you're working with very technical components or people that really understand this area. They will not want you to have wild ideas because they might be already saying, well, that's not possible, or that's dumb, or that can't happen. So this is where you encourage the yes and. The less talking, more listening, we always put it up there, and we always talk about it, and we always point at it. Embracing ambiguity and suspending judgment is another place. If you're doing open community meetings where, again, and when we're talking about really tough subjects, so let's say it's about building equity in a community, then you have to be extra careful to add additional ground rules around respect, around diversity of thought, around that kind of space to ensure that when you're talking about really hot topics that get people to react, that you address it up front. So actually a great example, and then I'll let you ask the next question. We facilitated a workshop for AIGA in Miami, again, by we, I mean me, along with two amazing AIGA leaders, and it was around HIV prevention and in Miami, which is a huge problem. And, we're not talking about, coming up with a fun idea for an event. We're talking about people's lives. And there's a lot of bias around that topic. And so we knew that we couldn't just enter a workshop without first getting them set in the right mind. So we did a panel discussion where we had people who were living with HIV and working with those communities that shared their insight. And it set the tone to make sure we did not want anyone in the room to start saying, really rude kind of like bias, like overarching generalizations about people that were living with HIV. Then we also did a mindfulness exercise that was about 3 to 5 minutes where we got everyone to sort of really kind of enter into this kind of somber type topic, with that right frame of mind and intention. So setting intention that we're talking about something hard, but we're going to do it together, and it's going to be a safe place for everyone.
I love that. That's excellent. One of the next questions that came up, and again, some of these I know you I think you saw a couple of questions out of the corner of your eye and kind of tried to fold in some answers here and there. But another question that came up was, what do you do if you receive a low rate of feedback surveys? And then kind of secondarily, what are examples of questions you ask?
Okay, so this is a good question. So first of all, low survey feedback is good and it hurts. So this is just the reality. Like, feedback sucks a lot sometimes. I mean, I don't want to hear about the things that I do wrong. When I was facilitating that 6-city workshop, I had really, really smart people. I mean, I'm talking about like just very technical, VPs of operation and IT, people that could definitely look at, my flailing, personality and one, not respect me. And so throughout, there was one general person who kept coming up to me to give me feedback. And I just had to take a deep breath and take it. And he made me better for that. When we receive low surveys, which I think is a good thing, because if all you're telling me is that I'm awesome, I don't know how else I can make things better. I do share out with the team. There is positioning, because I don't think everyone's always comfortable with hearing negative feedback. And then we also have to do something with it. That's the most important part. If something failed and you got bad feedback on it and then you didn't do anything about it, then why are you asking? Questions can be everything from, did you think the flow of the workshop went well? Is there anything that you'd like to add that we didn't, cover? Would you attend another one of these sessions? How did you feel, right, afterwards? Do you have a statement? If they're very happy, get them to write you a testimonial and then keep it in your happy folder of when people say nice things to you. I have one of those.
Excellent. We also had the question, how defined is the problem that you are going to solve prior to the workshop starting?
That is a hard question. So it should be really well defined, but sometimes you'll end up having sessions and workshops where you're trying to define the problem.
Yeah.
So in those 6 weeks, I knew that I was coming in with the most facilitation experience, the most experience in design thinking. And there were times when I could feel my team might be sort of leading us into outcomes that they already knew they were. So it's hey, I already know what we should do, so let's just have an activity so that everyone else also wants to do what I want to do. And that's when I would get uncomfortable and say, I just don't think we have the right problem. So yes. Joe, I saw you answer that question. Did you have something to add? Because problem framing is one of the hardest things. And I really loved your process for problem framing when we worked on the brand workshop too.
You're muted.
No, he might not unmute. Aha.
Oh, he can mute himself, but not unmute himself.
Yeah.
Let's check. There you go, Joe.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I definitely think that defining the problem is probably the most important thing you're going to do. I try to always turn it into a very simple statement. So I'll usually, what Jennifer and I did was we workshopped a need statement. We need to do this so that blank happens, and so it's asking, what is the outcome I'm trying to get to? And that's just talking to your stakeholders, talking amongst your co-facilitators and saying, this is the outcome we're trying to get to, but like Jen said, you can't always, you don't always have every single piece of information. So it's also understanding, again, that consequence, understanding that like, this is the problem that we have, this is the best we can define the problem right now. We don't know these things, so we cannot, it may change our problem statement later. So, this is how we're going to either, and you have to start to thinking about like, okay, well, this is how we start to solve that problem. Some ways, and I'm a big fan of it. I think Jen mentioned earlier the hopes and fears. So going through something like that can also help you develop a problem statement, because you might say, okay, what I hope to get out of this is this. And what I'm afraid of is we don't have the right Again, right problem. Well, why don't we have the right problem? The reason we don't have the right problem is because we don't have this information. Well, how do we get that information? Well, and you just sort of keep funneling down until you start to realize, okay, here's the singular thing we need to solve. And like I said, having that need statement where you can get everybody on the board and say, this is the outcome we're trying to get. This is the problem we're trying to solve. And everybody can start to look at it and say, and agree, yes, this is what we're trying to solve. At least you can kind of keep pushing, toward what the other problem you might come into later,
There was a question that popped up when you say stakeholders. Are you referring to individual organizational funders workshop?
So that's a good question. So my stakeholders change, and sometimes I've been trying to jot, like a DT activity might be a stakeholder map. So how do I define a stakeholder? I mean, definitely it's someone that I'm doing the workshop for. So if someone calls me and says, I want you to do this workshop, then that is a stakeholder. When I worked in higher ed as a industry specialist for the School of Design, my stakeholders were the people that we served. So students could be my stakeholders, the teachers and faculty, the career, the employers, and they all have different needs and different wants. And then another DT term is sponsor users. So those are people that are actually the ones that kind of are the end user is so hard because it's generally a tech term, but it's the humans. I mean, the sponsor users is if I'm trying to solve a problem and I don't have the people that have the problem in the room, I'm going to be missing out on something. So that's why we say, like, who are you bringing in from that process? If you're trying to solve a problem for someone and they're not in the room, then I don't know how you're going to solve that problem efficiently. And also to the problem statement, sometimes the problem statement does change throughout the workshop, and that's okay. And I think that's the point, is sometimes you don't fully know.
Right. And lastly, there was a question that had come in asking, what was your first lead experience? It started with, how long have you done this? How long have you done this? And what was your first lead experience?
Okay, so I have spoken to people who do this. They are facilitators full-time for work. I am not. I usually, like Joe says, I'm sneaking it in everywhere I can because I see the value. So I think it's tough. So I've been teaching for like 15 years. I've been facilitating for maybe 8. And I'd say, let me see. So in the same year, I would count that I was lead, was in 20, whatever last year was, 19. And first was when I was asked to come in. The Department of Health wanted to collaborate with the Wolfsonian Museum and AIGA Miami to develop a Design for Good event where designers would design posters around HIV awareness and prevention. For us, it was really important that we weren't just jumping straight into poster design, but instead we're really adding context to the designers so that their solutions actually solve problems for real people versus just, their own perspectives on the problem. The second workshop that I led that was that multi-city workshop, that one was really, really hard because that was for my job as brand director, and it was something that I think I had been advocating for and that they had been seeing that I was doing outside of work and bringing it into work. It was like this weird light bulb hit that I was like, why am I not using this at work all the time? And part of it is because of the advocacy is hard. And that was really one of the most rewarding and challenging, terrifying moments, was that 6 cities back to back. I can't tell you. Questions to ask yourself is, how do you get giant Post-it notes from here to Vancouver? FYI, you can't just get sticky notes and Post-it notes through the border that easy. Oh, and what happens on the day of your workshop when all of your materials disappear? Talk about having a backup plan. All my Sharpies, all my stickies, every material I had didn't make it to the venue in in Vancouver. I think it was Vancouver, it might have been Chicago. And I had to send people out, but I didn't tell them the size of the sticky notes. So they came with those little tiny square ones. You could put like one letter per sticky. So I didn't anticipate that. I definitely, so we had to like find an office store and go out, and you know, that was not, oh, and then of course the hotel wants to charge you like $1 million just to use their Post-it pads, but nothing you could do, you had to use it.
That is a really deep dive for a second project. We also had a question come up about who owns the ideas that are generated at a workshop, like agency, client, individuals?
Oh, that's an excellent question. So you should definitely make sure that you're flushing that out in the project scope. The work that Joe and I did for that client is definitely property of the client. We can't share those case studies externally. The work that I did for barcoding, it was competitive, and I can't share the results of that, publicly. I can talk a little bit about process and how I led. So I think it's really dependent on your client and who owns that. For me, the whole point is to make teams, processes, everything better. So I want to give that work, but I might say that, so Joe and I talked about this. We built a workshop, and so now that workshop is our intellectual property. So I wouldn't give my client the step-to-step guide on how to run that workshop. Unless they ask, and then I think you'd want to incorporate that into your pricing structure. Because again, the difference is, have you been asked to teach how to facilitate and run a workshop? Or are you being asked to facilitate and run a workshop? And I think that line isn't always clear. And I make it very clear that teaching people to facilitate and run a workshop and do design thinking is very different than running and leading a design thinking workshop for an outcome.
Yeah, and as a follow-on to that, to the intellectual property question, are there ways to ensure fair compensation for innovative breakthroughs?
I don't know if I have an answer to that question. I think that all comes down to negotiation. Again, because we can't get into specifics, it's a little hard for me to really say that, right? Because there's too many factors. Who's involved? What's the project? What are you looking for? And I think that those are the places where the scope is going to be really important. I had a mentee who had asked me to help facilitate, and I knew that her company had very, very strict security guidelines, and that if I was to help, I would have to, be really brought in internally to do that work. So, I think there's too many factors for me to answer that.
Fair enough. Did anybody else have any last questions they'd like to bring in? We're at 12:07, so we just went just a tad beyond, but I'm glad that we got to hit all of the questions that popped up over the last 2 hours through the chat. And Doug says it was a great presentation. He took over 6 pages of notes. But yes, thank you so much, both Jennifer and Joseph, for joining us today. This was fantastic. And again, just as a reminder to everybody that to keep your eyes peeled, we will be excited to develop and share with you. This was just like the DT 101, and we're excited to do the DT deep dive coming later this summer. We're looking at July. So keep your eyes peeled for that as you check for your email. Jen, really quickly before we hop off, did you have any questions regarding the future? Anything else that you would like to ask or collect while we're here today?
I don't think I do. I just think I'm grateful for you giving your Saturday to sit and listen to me for a couple hours and share my experience. I very much appreciate it, and it's been great.
Absolutely. Excellent. To Helen, regarding, I just saw that your question pop up as well. This session was recorded, and at the end, a copy of this session will be sent out to ticket holders.
And yeah, if you need, I don't know about the deck, but Helen, send me a message. I guess we'll figure that out, but I'm definitely happy to share.
I know a lot of presenters are kind of like, well, my deck's my deck. If you want to see my deck, you have to hear me talk through it. So I'd never volunteer for a speaker to be like, oh yeah, they'll send their deck out for you. Cause that, a lot of people, their deck is very proprietary. This is what they've worked on. Right. And kind of still like to be.
Take a screenshot.
Right. And we're all taking, my first screenshot was definitely your giant sticky of ground rules. There's a lot that are regular, and there were a couple tucked in there that I really loved, and I was like, I have to remember these for later. I have to remember these for the big community meeting coming up.
We are very, very excited to put together a deep dive, and I will be bringing in some of my colleagues to assist, and so please stay tuned, because I think it's going to be really great, and it will be limited seating just because it's just hard to have these types of workshops.
Yeah, we are looking at having more like activities than a listening session, and really getting people into breakout rooms with facilitators and practicing addressing problems and working directly. Yeah, so hence that's kind of the reason why that one will have limited seating, to make sure that it's a group that we can work with. So, all right. Everybody take care. Thank you so much for joining us on this Saturday morning, both Jen and Joe. So excellent to see your face again. And to all of our attendees who gave us their Saturday mornings. It is now officially the afternoon. Enjoy the rest of your day.